This morning, we are delighted to host FBI Director Christopher Wray. Director Wray, we thank you for your leadership, your steadfast service to our nation, and for making time for us this morning. I know the audience looks forward to hearing from you and learning more about the Bureau's new intelligence program strategy. Briefly, I would like to recognize our sponsors. We would not be here today without them. BAE Systems, ClearanceJobs.com, EY, Leidos, Raytheon Technologies, Sims Software, and Strongbox Cyber Solutions. If everybody would join me in a round of applause, thank you. And as a reminder, this event is on the record and open to the press. We have a lot of press in the room today. We will be sharing this on our website, the recording, early next week. And I encourage you all to submit your questions to our amazing INSA interns. The question cards, which are on your table, are courtesy of BAE Systems. These interns are all looking for jobs in the intelligence community, and many of them graduate from grad school in May, so I encourage you all to get to know them. It is my pleasure to now introduce the President of Cybersecurity, Intelligence and Services at Raytheon Technologies, and INSA Board Director, John DeSimone, who will introduce our moderator and our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you to INSA for hosting this morning's discussion. It is my pleasure to be able to introduce two esteemed partners in the national security field, Ms. Sue Gordon and Director Christopher Wray. As we are all aware, we work and live in an increasingly complex threat environment marked by evolving nature of cyber operations, criminal activities, and many more threats to our nation. In this environment, the cybersecurity, intelligence, and service business stands at the forefront. The CIS business is a trusted partner to the FBI and the overall national security enterprise. The employees of the CIS business work shoulder to shoulder with our U.S. government partners in the stabilization of threats and defeating adversarial activities. It's truly an honor to have the privilege to lead this organization, the CIS business, which will soon be known by another name. Our moderator, the Honorable Sue Gordon, is one of the most accomplished leaders in the history of national security. Serving as the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence from 2017 to 2019, she prioritized integrating intelligence, expanding outreach, fostering innovation, and advancing diversity and inclusion across the community. In the private sector, she continues contributing to the mission through various board and advisory roles, including as INSA's Senior Intelligence Advisor. Thank you, Sue, for guiding today's conversation. Our guest of honor, the Honorable Christopher Wray, is the 8th Director of the FBI, serving in this position since 2017. Director Wray's career includes roles in the private sector and significant leadership positions in the U.S. Department of Justice. From Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Georgia to the Criminal Division under President George W. Bush, he has been instrumental in efforts to combat terrorism, espionage, and cybercrime, collaborating with both domestic and foreign government partners. Director Wray will deliver some prepared remarks followed by Q&A with Ms. Gordon. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Director Christopher Wray.
All right, well, morning. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with this group in particular because I really do appreciate the way INSA has, for years, brought together the public, private, and academic sectors of the intelligence and national security communities to find practical and creative solutions to national security challenges. And that work is more important now than ever because, as this group knows all too well, there's no shortage of those challenges out there. So I look forward to the conversation with Sue in a few minutes about some of the specific challenges we're facing and how we're tackling those. But Before we get into the discussion, I thought I'd take just a few minutes to talk about what I see as the FBI's unique and valuable role in our integrated intelligence community, the new strategy we're rolling out for our intelligence program to maximize our contributions to the IC. And before I close, I also want to highlight one threat in particular that's front of mind for all of us this year, which is election security. Because when it comes to election security, intelligence professionals across the government have to make sure that we're all leveraging our very best intelligence to combat this threat together. For all 115 years of our existence, the FBI has had a dual and complementary mission, enforcing federal law and protecting national security. And though that might have seemed novel back in 1908, that dual role, in many ways, is tailor-made for today's challenges. Our adversaries would love to exploit the gaps that they perceive in the U.S. system between how we approach national security and criminal threats, for example, and how we share responsibility among the government, academic, and private sectors for defending critical technology, intellectual property, and critical infrastructure. But I think everybody in this room knows that a division of labor does not mean we're divided. On the contrary, the fact that we're all here together is a testament to our commitment to joint efforts. It does mean, though, that each of us, regardless of sector or agency, has to invest time to understand each other's strengths, how to work with one another, how to share information with one another. And that's why it's so important to me that our partners understand what the FBI uniquely brings to the table. Not because I'm tooting the FBI's horn, although that does come with the job, but because partnerships and our ability to leverage all of our strengths together, that's our greatest asset. The FBI can bridge a lot of those gaps our enemies want to exploit, thanks to our unique combination of law enforcement and intelligence authorities, our domestic and international presence, and our ability to directly engage with both the IC and the private sector. And in this world of increasingly complex threats at the FBI, we're striving to use every legal tool at our disposal. As a member of both the global law enforcement community with Title 18 authorities and the IC with Title 50 authorities, we can focus our efforts in multiple directions and support a broad range of partners to collect intelligence and act on it. So depending on the situation, we can use criminal legal process, things like subpoenas, search warrants, wiretaps, or national security tools like the critically important FISA 702. Our robust human source programs facilitate our collection of human intelligence using confidential sources and undercover operations, and our law enforcement status puts us in a position to request and get evidence held overseas through our foreign partners. As one of our senior executives likes to say, the FBI is like a Swiss Army knife. We've got a tool for almost every occasion, and you want to have us in reach when you need us. At a time when threats are more global and complex than ever before, but our resources are more limited, we've got to make the best use of every capability I just described to be successful. So put simply, we need to reduce our risk and maximize our advantage. And that's why we recently released a new 5-year intelligence program strategy. That Intel program strategy emphasizes 3 levers: technology, tradecraft, and training, to help us do just that. So the first, technology, is key to addressing a rapidly evolving environment where every adversary we face, whether they're motivated by greed, harm, or global advantage, is using technology to make their efforts more impactful and less traceable. And a deluge of data is overwhelming human capacity to process, exploit, assess, share, and act on it in a timely way. In Sue's day, OD&I was forward-thinking in identifying the need to augment our greatest resource, our human talent, with tools and technology to reduce the risk of missing important threat signals amid all the noise. Today, just one investigation of a cyber intrusion could bring in terabytes of data, and we've got to be able to quickly distill that information so we can find the needles in an ever-growing haystack. We need to exploit data we've lawfully obtained and apply advanced tools and analytics to glean all the insight that data can give us as fast as we can. And part of how we'll get there is by recruiting and developing an FBI cadre of dedicated data professionals, while also training our intelligence workforce to increase their own data acumen and enhancing this talent with cutting-edge tools, including those developed by our IC and private industry partners. In fact, just recently, one of our FBI scientists patented a program that will potentially help us address threats posed by synthetic content, think deep fakes, which I think all of us in the IC and law enforcement are highly concerned about. We're also deploying tools like photo recognition obtained from outside vendors but honed at the Bureau to better identify things like guns. Under our new intelligence program strategy, we're going to continue to innovate our way towards solutions like these. The second lever is tradecraft, which, of course, is a term we apply to how we produce analysis and how we recruit and operate confidential human sources. Both analytic and human tradecraft are the means by which we ensure integrity, objectivity, and rigor in our intelligence work. Because, as I tell all our new analysts as they graduate in Quantico, intelligence, of course, isn't always so clear-cut, doesn't come with a nice, neat label, and it's often more of an art than a science. So we're elevating the tradecraft we use to recruit and operate human sources securely with a goal of training all special agents to a high level by the time they end their 2-year probationary period. The goal is to equip them to balance the risks we've got to mitigate with the risks we have to take to collect intelligence that will identify threats and keep Americans safe, and to prepare them to navigate the threat of ubiquitous data collection, what we at the FBI often refer to as ubiquitous technical surveillance, or UTS, to describe how our adversaries can exploit the digital trail that we all leave behind. UTS poses a threat not just to our sources and our operations, but to FBI personnel themselves. So the way we conduct our business, whether that's making a procurement decision or proposing a joint source operation with some partner overseas, has got to account for the tradecraft needed to protect our people and operations. The FBI is recognized among the IC as an agency on the forefront of training and awareness on this particular issue, but this is one area where we need every IC agency's capabilities and expertise to counter the threats, as well as productive partnerships with the private sector to develop tools that will help us secure our operations and our people. It's also critical that everyone in the FBI who writes and reviews analysis applies a consistently high level of analytic tradecraft, no matter what program they work or what job role they have. And that's all the more important today when disinformation and distrust cloud the environment in which intelligence is collected, analyzed, and received. So we've got to make sure that the tradecraft we use in our analysis is beyond reproach. In the words of Linda Weisgold, it's tradecraft and proper coordination that turn one individual's analysis into an IC product we can all stand behind. So our Intel program strategy emphasizes our responsibility to deliver exceptional analysis that enables action, providing insights unique to our place as the lead intelligence agency operating domestically, getting that analysis in the hands of those who need it, whether that's state and local law enforcement, academia, private industry, other government agencies, foreign partners, and strategically embedding our personnel in places where they can strengthen the connection between FBI intelligence and its consumers. And that brings me to our third lever in our Intel strategy, which is training, which focuses on building on the multidisciplinary team approach that is so important to our work, emphasizing to our new agents that they're collectors and consumers of intelligence as well as investigators, and reinforcing the training our analysts, linguists, and professional staff receive to understand how their work feeds our operations. The key to this is giving all our employees a common baseline so they can intuitively form cohesive teams and tap into the expertise of all job roles, and ultimately understand how to apply the full range of our authorities and capabilities to ensure that we're leveraging everything we have in everything we do. That is the roadmap we'll use to better position ourselves to meet our intelligence mission, to identify threats and opportunities, to inform decision-making, and to avoid surprise. It challenges all of us in the FBI, no matter what program we focus on, to think differently, to work more closely together, and to lean into all our authorities and capabilities. So as I mentioned at the outset, one threat where intelligence-driven team approaches are absolutely vital is the threat that foreign adversaries pose to our free and fair elections. Now, the U.S., as everyone here knows, has confronted foreign malign influence threats in the past, but this election cycle, the U.S. will face more adversaries moving at a faster pace and enabled by new technology. Advances in generative AI, for instance, are lowering the barrier to entry, making it easier for both more and less sophisticated foreign adversaries to engage in malign influence, while making foreign influence efforts by players both old and new more realistic and more difficult to detect. Defending against these evolving threats requires all of us to be lashed tightly together, to continue hitting these threats together early and hard. For us at the FBI, that means close collaboration with the intelligence professionals like those of you from all of our partner agencies, NSA, U.S. Cyber Command, CIA, et cetera, but we're also working with state and local policymakers and election authorities that oversee nearly all of the actual running of elections in the U.S., as well as FISA. And vitally, we're working with the private sector as well, wherever appropriate. In all these partnerships, we're trying to share information and create a stronger joint defense so that we can more effectively identify and disrupt any threats to our nation's elections. And as intelligence professionals, we've got to highlight threats in specific evidence-based ways so that we're usefully arming our partners and, in particular, the public against the kinds of foreign influence operations they're likely to confront. So while the threats are moving faster and have grown more complex, I'm confident that our partnerships across the government and the private sector are better than ever, and that our combat tempo response to election threats will remain as fast, well-coordinated, and skillful as ever. So before I close, I just want to say once more how much I appreciate the partnerships represented here today. It is, as I said before, one of the greatest advantages that we gather in settings like this to learn from each other and explore how we can get better together, and that we actually look forward to doing that. And that's not something I bet the Russians and the Chinese services are doing. Certainly won't have breakfast like this, but so in that spirit, I'm grateful for the opportunity to spend time with you this morning and to share how the FBI is doing its part to contribute to our country and our security. And I thank you for having me, and I look forward to our discussion.
Awesome. How lucky are we, right? I can't believe I get to do this, but I have to reflect on something. You may wonder how I managed to get this chair. And I've been worried that in the 5 years since I left the government that maybe my tradecraft had been slipping. Tish is sitting over there. I'm sitting here. And I get this day, so mad skills. And then I shared this with Director Wray. When I was coming to this event, I talked to my kids, and we were having a family meeting about the things that we were going to do. And I talked to my Marines, the major and captain, and they said, "Oh my God, Mom, you've got to do this. You got to honor a man of service." I'm like, "I do." And then I talked to my lawyers, the assistant district attorneys, Gordon. They said, "Oh my God, Mom, you've got to do it. The face of law and order, the person that's keeping it even for the rest of us, you got to do it." So, Chris, I'm both honoring my family and proving that I've still got skills to be here with you.
Well, it's nice to be here. I will say my family just says I need to stop talking.
So we're gonna have a great time today. Let's start with kind of where you began, and that is, this is a big old goofy world. I've never seen, I'm old, and I've seen a lot of threats and a lot of fraught dynamic times. These are as complex as I've ever seen. So you alluded to it, but can you give us a feel for how you see the FBI's priorities against these myriad challenges that not only the United States, but free and open societies globally face?
Well, I mean, certainly I mentioned election security,
Yep.
right? And I won't rehash that
Yep.
now, since I covered it some in my remarks. But this being an election year, and frankly an election year all over the world for a lot of places, that's very much top of mind. But when I look at the threats, the thing that jumps out at me is how many threats are elevated at the same time. And I sometimes only half-jokingly remark that everywhere I turn, somebody's got really good ideas for what the FBI needs to be doing more of. I'm still looking for the person who can give me any responsible ideas for what it is the FBI can be doing less of.
Right.
And so you could look at priorities a bunch of different ways. If you look at threats, obviously we're intensely focused on the threat posed by the CCP, the Chinese government, that cuts across everything from human operations, different ways of penetrating our critical infrastructure, whether it's cyber, investments, et cetera, their transnational repression. So there's a huge focus on China and the challenge it presents. Iran, frankly, has been more brazen over the last few years than I've seen in my career in terms of a cyber attack on a children's hospital, an effort to kill the former U.S. National Security Advisor on U.S. soil, an effort to kidnap and murder an American dissident journalist just who had the audacity to criticize the Iranian regime in New York City. That's a big deal. So, and especially post-October 7th, for the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, we are focused on Iran too. But then we've got, ransomware. We've been growing dramatically on the cyber side, and I expect that to continue. And then there's stuff that may not be as relevant to INSA in a professional way, but certainly is relevant to everybody in a personal way. Let's not forget our bread and butter. Traditional violent crime, the cartels, all that stuff is child exploitation. So we got a lot going on. My solution to how we deal with all of that We had our SAC conference, our Special Agent in Charge conference this past fall, and they asked me in our sort of private session, Director, if you could pick only one thing, and you can only pick one thing for us to focus on for the next year, what would it be? And I said partnerships. Because if we get that right, and if we do that better than we've done even in the years preceding, that by itself addresses so many of these things. That's how we get complementary strengths and authorities across all these different threats, and we make, I like to say, the FBI's 2 with somebody else's 2, and have it equal more than 4, have it equal 5 or 6 or 7, and to have the whole be greater than the sum of the parts, I think, is one of the benefits that comes from true partnerships.
Yeah. So I love the point you made about what can you do less of. I've always hated the term pivot. You know, you're going to pivot to China, you're going to pivot to East Asia, because that implies that you can turn your back on something. I think you've just described a head on a swivel is what you need to have. So let's talk about partnerships. I remember for this career CIA officer to go to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I took a lot of questions about why do you need that position? You know, it's one of the perennial questions. And I always said, because had we not, we would not have had the coordination amongst the agencies that we did now, particularly with law enforcement, with DHS and others. So expand a little bit on this notion of interagency partnership, and if you can give us a couple of examples of things that perhaps wouldn't have been accomplishable had you not had the great partnerships across the community.
Well, first off, I would argue that today's intelligence community is more of a true community than ever before. And I look, one of the advantages to having been in this world for a long time and then taken a detour into the private sector where the grass is browner, and then came back, is that you get to see the before and after in a way that you might not, you know, as much. And when I look at the way in which the intelligence community at all levels is integrated now, it's really striking. I mean, I sometimes say we've gone from an era which I saw before 9/11 certainly, and right after 9/11, of kind of, there was competition and tension, and then there was kind of grudging deconfliction, and then there was willing collaboration and cooperation. But now we've kind of moved to integration, which is where we need to be. And I see that, again, at every level, at the leadership level. I'm now 6.5 years plus, maybe, into this job. I'm not sure I can get to 5 fingers on my hand about the number of times we've had some turf battle or disagreement with my sister agencies. When I was in this world the last time, you couldn't have gone a week without that. I look around my morning meeting room. We have SCS level senior representatives of both CIA and NSA and DIA in my, you know, inner circle in the morning meetings. But it's all the way down to the task forces that were, you know, if you go back 25 years, you had the Joint Terrorism Task Forces. Now, in addition to the JTTFs all over the country, you have cyber task forces, counterintelligence task forces, a national counterintelligence task force, all of which have partners from these different agencies at the working level, which is where the real magic happens, all kind of knitted together. So can I give specific examples? As you know from your past life, a lot of the great things I could say about my IC partners, they wouldn't want me to talk about on camera. But the results that we've been achieving across all these threats, whether it's joint sequenced operations against some, you know, GRU cyber attack, or disrupting an attempt to assassinate somebody here by the Iranians, or any number of other things that we do to protect the American private sector from the CCP, they all invariably involve that 2 + 2 to get 5 effect that I was describing earlier with any number of these partners.
Yeah, if I would have chosen one, I would have started with election security, because I just think the growth in that area of coordination is one that's just been remarkable across so many. So one of the things I talk about is, and I love doing it in front of this audience, is increasingly the private sector are national security decision makers. And they need to let that rest on their heads. So there are another group of individuals and companies with whom you're partnering to secure the nation and our interests. How's that going?
I think that's been one of the other real, we talked post 9/11 about the paradigm shift. I would argue that we're in the middle of another paradigm shift right now, which is how certainly we at the FBI, but I think the IC more broadly too, is partnering with the private sector. And I think when people look back on this era, people will say there was another paradigm shift. And I see it in big picture ways and small bore ways all the time. I mean, if I looked at the FBI's top threats, I can make a case why every single one of them has moved in a way in which private sector partnership is more important. Cyber is the obvious example. 85% of our critical infrastructure is in the hands of the private sector, and the percentage is even higher than that if you look at our innovation and our PII. So the attack surface for the bad guys is the private sector. And if we're about protecting the American people, then we got to protect that attack surface and help work with the private sector, make it a harder target for the bad guys. But even if you went beyond cyber, which is probably the most obvious example, counterintelligence. It's not that spy versus spy, the Cold War stuff it's still happening, plenty of it, but more and more our counterintelligence work is focused on economic espionage, which is really just IP theft. And guess whose IP it is they're trying to steal? That's the private sector. So again, the attack surface is the private sector. The intelligence that we need is in the hands of the private sector often. But even something like terrorism, which is less obvious than the other two, we've moved in a world where instead of the sleeper cell trying to fly the 747 into a landmark or a skyscraper and kill thousands of people in one effort, now you've got lone actors or small cells of people engaged in unsophisticated attacks against soft targets that they can mobilize to do in hours as opposed to months or years. And the attack surface there is not the nuclear power plant or the Statue of Liberty. It's everybody's office space. It's the shopping mall. It's the school that your kids go to. It's all that stuff. So the attack surface there is the private sector.
Now that I've spent time in the private sector, new trick for this old dog, what I've seen even in the 5 years I've been out is the trust being shown the other way, the FBI being a trusted partner for all the reasons that you say from the industry and the private sector perspective as well. So I think when last I left my hero with you when we worked together in 2018 was the reauthorization of Section 702 of FISA. And you've been pretty direct on the import of that reauthorization. I think talking about tying our hands and rebuilding walls. You want to expand a little bit on why you think that's such an important
yeah, I mean, I feel
necessary capability for the United
I think
States.
necessary. I'm not somebody who's really prone to hyperbole.
We've noticed
and
that.
necessary, frankly, is an understatement. I mean, indispensable. And I don't use words like indispensable very often. It is the most important tool we have to protect Americans from foreign threats, foreign terrorist organizations, the Chinese government, the Russians, the Iranians. And increasingly, it is the way in which we're protecting American organizations, businesses, and others from cyber attacks. That's how we know who's getting targeted. That's how we know who to race out and warn. And in the post-October 7th world, we've got a powerful reminder that the foreign terrorist threat ain't gone away. And so when I invoked the 9/11 example, I guess a couple months ago, I did it very thoughtfully as somebody who was in FBI headquarters on 9/11 and spent a lot of time with family members of 9/11 victims. And if you think back to that era, you had people saying, well, how could we not connect the dots? How did we not connect the dots? Well, we didn't connect the dots because there was this wall between that prevented the interagency, in effect, from sharing and connecting the dots. That wasn't a wall that was set up because it was constitutionally required. That was a wall that well-meaning but misguided people set up that essentially blinded us from talking to each other. That all changed post 9/11. Well, let's make no mistake, what people are talking about doing with some of the ideas they have to change 702 is that's what rebuilding the wall feels like. It's a different wall, but it's the same concept, essentially trying to create barriers that prevent us from connecting the dots. And when you hear 702 and you hear these discussions about should there be a warrant requirement, for example, for the FBI to search under 702, let's be clear what we're talking about. The search that they're talking about is like everyone here, think about when you have your email, and you say, didn't I get an email from Sue Gordon? And so you type Sue Gordon into that little field, and emails that you already have, you can now quickly get to the ones that Sue sent you. Or didn't I get an email about INSA? And you can type in INSA. I mean, it's the same concept. It's information that we've already lawfully collected. It's not new collection. So the question is are you going to impose a warrant requirement on FBI analysts to look through what we already lawfully have? Or do you want to make them essentially rummage through haystack after haystack and think about all those threats I was just talking about? We're talking about a terrorism moving at the speed of social media, cyber attacks that have to be resolved in hours. Time matters.
Yeah.
And that's where 702 is most useful. So have there been failures, including very much failures on the FBI end, that have necessitated reforms? Absolutely. I've owned that. We've taken a lot of responsibility for that. We've put in place all kinds of reforms, and those reforms are working. And you don't have to just take the FBI's word for it. You can look at what the court has said. The same court that blasted us, rightly, for our prior failings, has said the reforms are working, and compliance is now up to like over 98%. And we're not stopping at 98%. I want to get as close to 100 as possible. But for God's sakes, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I worry that there are some who, for whatever reason, would be tempted to do that.
And your point that you made earlier about it's hard to prove the value, in part because of things that didn't happen, and in part because of things that are thwarted and wanting to protect that. But I love that you're taking this stand, and it is actually for security and safety.
I don't want to have to prove
Yep, I agree.
what happened and why it was needed after we lose it.
Absolutely.
And somebody's got to be talking to the families of those victims and saying why we made a choice. Let's be clear. A lot of people throw around words like warrantless, constitution. None of this is required by the Constitution. None of it. Every court that's looked at this issue has said that FISA 702, including U.S. person queries that the FBI runs, that is constitutional. So if we decide to make a change here, it's going to be a change that we will, as a country, some people, have made a conscious policy choice. And we better be ready to explain that policy choice to the victims that we haven't prevented from becoming victims later, because that's what this is. Like I said, we own our mistakes. We've addressed them. There are reforms in some of the legislation that's been proposed that take those reforms a little bit further, and we're fine with that. But let's be clear, the Chinese government is not tying its hands by choice, certainly, behind its back. Hezbollah, the IRGC Quds Force, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, they're not tying their hands behind their back. And so that's why I have sometimes referred to some of the kookier ideas that are out there as unilateral disarmament.
Did I tell you I was proud to be on the stage with you? So you all notice I have cards on my hand. These are questions that your colleagues are asking. If you want yours to be included, it would be best that you write them down and have them sent out to me. All right, switching a little bit, although I love that and I am inspired anew. Let's talk technology. What's so interesting about technology today is technology represents both power and peril. It allows us to both do things, and it has potential to have negative effect. Let's talk about the FBI. AI is a great example, but the question I got is there are a number of necessary technologies that need to be employed in order for us to have the same advantages today as we had in the past. You want to talk a little bit about how the FBI is really looking at what AI specifically, but other technologies that can provide advantage?
So, yeah, I mean, whether it's AI specifically or technologies more broadly, every time I get briefed on some emerging, really AI has kind of gone beyond emerging, but technology, my reaction is always the same. My first reaction is, wow, we can do that? And then my second reaction is, oh, God, you mean they can do that? And of course, the they is invariably people who aren't constrained by the rule of law and ethics and norms and so forth. So my reaction to questions like this is probably a little bit different from what people are normally looking for or expecting, because most people want to talk about all the great stuff we can do with emerging technology, and we are doing plenty of that, whether it's improving the speed with which we can translate things that are in foreign languages, or getting through all that deluge of data I was talking about before, or the patent that the FBI scientist, has gotten recently for a technology that would help us detect synthetic content. AI is very useful in helping to identify intrusions and adversarial use of AI, for example. AI is very good against AI. But we actually are more focused on the defense side of it. In other words, how are these technologies in the wrong hands being used? Because that will inform what we need in terms of our technology. And so our defense part of it, I mean, the short version is take AI. If anybody out there is thinking, well, I sure hope those guys aren't using AI, the answer is too late, they are. And so we're seeing AI used now kind of across the threats that we contend with, not just the national security threats, but the more traditional criminal threats as well. Think about something like spear phishing. We're all accustomed to, you get those emails, you think, it's probably not this guy, English is not this guy's first language, something weird about this email, I definitely shouldn't click on the link. Well, now those emails are infinitely more sophisticated and sound much more credible, so it's much more tricky to make sure you don't fall prey to them. At the moment, AI is most useful for what I would call kind of mediocre bad guys and making them kind of like intermediate. And that's not good news either, right? The last thing we need is a bunch of intermediate level bad guys out there that are, but that is where it's most useful at the moment. The really sophisticated adversaries are using AI more just to increase the speed and scale of their efforts. But we are coming towards a day very soon where what I would call the experts, the most sophisticated adversaries, are going to find ways to use AI to be even more elite. And that's a very daunting time. So we're very concerned about trying to get ahead of that, working with partners, the private sector, et cetera. And then the second area of defense that we focus on is protecting AI innovation. I think people tend to forget that the best innovation in the world of AI is in the US. I mean, I think it's like 18 of the top 20 innovators in AI are American. So guess who wants to steal that?
Right.
The Chinese, among others. So we're very focused in the ways that I was describing in our earlier conversation on trying to protect American AI innovation from being stolen, because what we really worry about is the Chinese government, which already has stolen more of Americans' personal and corporate data than every nation, big or small, combined, and has a bigger hacking program than every major nation combined. You take that and get them to have their hands on our AI innovation, that's a significant force multiplier. In fact, force multiplier probably doesn't do it justice. So that's why we're focused on, yes, AI, incredibly exciting, great promise, all kinds of cool stuff that are going to change the world as we know it, but because we're an agency, first and foremost, that's trying to defend America, we're probably more focused on how the adversaries can use it.
Yeah, but I think, Chris, what you've just described there is a really good example of why I think the partnership between the national security community and the private sector on these new technologies is super important. Because market forces are wonderful and it creates this great strength in America. It has given us capabilities to the envy of the world, and we are able to lead. But the national security community also understands the risk side. And so when we do that partnership right, when we have trust between the two and we have kind of a shared purpose and balance those, I think it works out. I love when you said mediocre talent with new tools, mediocre adversaries with advanced tools. You know, digital connectedness was a little bit like that. Like, because all of a sudden, I mean, there were always state actors with sophisticated capabilities, but what happened when the world became connected is anyone could go any distance for no money with great effect. So I know that this has been one of the real focus areas of the FBI, has been taking your traditional counterintelligence and then putting it into this cyber digital connected world, whether it's digital attack or whether it's information disorder. And it kind of ties to a question I got in terms of evidence of Russian interference. So if you could kind of just give us a lay of the land in terms of the FBI's traditional tradecraft now applied to this digital landscape and where you think the real action is.
Well, I mean, I think some of what I would say blends together a lot of the things that we've talked about already, strands of it. I mean, we learned post 9/11 in the CT fight about the value of partnerships, about the importance of integrating intelligence and operations, about innovation, about sharing information, about combining to maximize impact. And I think a lot of that same mindset is now part of our cyber strategy, which we rolled out a couple of years ago, and why you're now seeing things like the efforts we did against the Russians in Dying Ember, which is against the GRU, where you're seeing the FBI working with partners, not just putting people in orange jumpsuits, although we're still going to keep doing that as much as possible, again, consistent with the law, but doing court-authorized operations to go after the adversaries, their infrastructure. So, decoupling them from their own botnets, seizing their servers, getting a hold of decryption keys that, like the Hive ransomware group, where we basically hacked the hackers and essentially got the decryption keys, and then while the hackers didn't realize it, parceling them out to the victims. So you're seeing us do more joint sequenced operations that involve multiple partners, that are less focused on who gets credit for anything and more focused on how do we enable somebody else to use their authorities to increase the collective impact on the adversary. And it could be the GRU, it could be the PLA, the MSS, it could be the Iranians, it could be a ransomware actor, but it's about sharing information to maximize impact on the adversary.
Yeah, I love that. Imposing consequence through our sure action, I think, is something that we increasingly see, and I think people are looking for, because for, I don't know, the previous decade, it felt like every day was a new story of what was being done to us. It is nice to know that we were imposing consequence. All right, so we have 10 minutes left. I have 4 hours of questions, just myself. So sorry to his team, you're just stuck here. We've closed the doors. We're going to do a little bit of speed round, and I'm going to try and hit the questions they have. And the first one is one that I know is really important to you. What does the FBI recruiting landscape look like? And what challenges are you facing?
Well, that's funny. We were just talking about that at
I know, I
breakfast.
thought,
Yeah, so that's kind of,
we had a warm-up question.
well, that's good. So our recruiting actually, and a lot of people don't know this, our recruiting has actually over the last several years gone like gangbusters. In 2019, the number of Americans applying to be special agents at the FBI tripled the annual pace that it was when I started. And while it's ebbed and flowed some since then, we've still at like record levels. And we are, we have a selection rate now that's like down around like 5%, which is more competitive than almost any college or selective university in the world. And we're getting high quality applicants, where like 50% of them have advanced degrees, something like a third to 50% of them are former military or law enforcement. Language skills are, proliferating across the class. And when I say language skills, I mean like you could conduct an interview in that foreign language, not just ask like, where's the restroom at the restaurant, like real language skills. And so our recruiting, I think, at a time when certainly law enforcement in this country is having sort of the opposite experience. I talk to chiefs and sheriffs all over the country every week. They're all experiencing a downturn. So for us to have an uptick is something I don't take for granted at all, but it's allowed us to be more strategic in, do we need more cyber talent, STEM? Do we need certain language skills? How can we improve diversity? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things we can do with the uptick in the number of well-qualified applicants. And I have not missed a Quantico graduation once since I've been in this job. And it's one of my favorite things to do because I get to see firsthand the quality of the people coming in.
That's unbelievable, right?
I go run with every class at least once.
Show off.
Fortunately, they all have to run behind me, so that works out well. It's one of the perks of the job, but and I love doing that. And so I get to feel sort of firsthand the character and the quality of the people.
Yeah, I can't remember when Jim Mattis, early in his tenure, was at NGA. And someone asked him what gave him the most hope, and he said, if young women and men to continue to come and serve, we're going to be okay. I think he'd probably say the same thing.
Well, and I see these people after they start, which is something, I see my deputy director, Paula Bates, sitting out there. We talk about this a lot. They are, these new people who are joining, these new men and women who are joining the FBI, a lot of them in their first, like before they're even off their probationary period, are making huge cases and doing unbelievable things. And so these aren't people who came in to kind of wait and see how things go and kind of just make sure you don't make any waves. They're coming in to make stuff happen, and it's great.
I love it. It's kind of a counter narrative to what you hear so often. People want to serve. Service is still in vogue. All right, in this time of budget challenges, you thought you'd get out of here without a budget question. I'm here for you. How do you think about managing limited resources to ensure that you have the people and technology necessary? Because operations eat up a lot of resources, but you got to invest in the future as well. How do you think through it?
Well, I mean, anytime the word budget comes up, I can't resist saying, as I said, everywhere I go, people have great ideas of things the FBI needs to be doing more of. And any negative impact on our budget means we're going to be doing less of all those things. In particular, when I talk to state and local law enforcement, there are only two conversations. And again, I'm talking to state and local law enforcement in this country every week in one way or another. I hear either, Director, thank you for the FBI, thank God, please don't stop doing X or Y, or Director, thank God for everything you're doing, we need more of it. None of them are asking for us to dial it back. And so I would ask those who are thinking about our budget to really think carefully about who it is they're trying to impact here. And I would argue the people who will suffer if our budget goes back are the American people we and they are sworn to serve. But how do we deal with the limited resources that we have or will have? It's the partnership piece that we talked about before. We have these task forces that I talked about. That's a huge blessing. We have something like 6,000 officers now from different departments, again, who, by the way, are all suffering recruiting, and they're putting these people to work on FBI task forces, which I think speaks volumes about their views of the FBI. But that enables us to leverage those additional resources to go further. But then I think the other piece of it, which is relevant to the intelligence program strategy that I rolled out here today, is that, to me, one of the key benefits of really integrating intelligence and operations is it allows you to prioritize and make the limited resources you have go as far as you can stretch them, because you know where you're gonna have the most impact and how you can spread yourself thinly but wisely.
Love that. So 2 questions. So how many, what do we have, 3 minutes? Minutes your time.
I'm looking for the red, yellow, green.
Exactly.
Thing.
I know, they didn't put them here, and I can't believe they didn't with me, because seriously, 4 hours. Do you have any advice for young professionals seeking to work for the Bureau? What's the best career path? I want you to know that since we've been sitting up here and he said languages, I've started my Duolingo. I might have skills. So best advice for young professionals on pursuing a path with the FBI?
Be like Sue. Well, I mean, look, I don't think there is a career path. I think the beauty of FBI recruiting is that we're recruiting people from lots of different career paths. But I think everything we were all taught as kids is still what matters most. Treat other people the way you would want to be treated. Work hard, call it straight. I mean, all those things, none of them is new, none of them is magic by themselves, but that's ultimately what's most important. And I think if you do those kinds of things, you put yourself in the best path to success, whether it's at the FBI or anywhere else.
Chris, I'm giving you the last word. What did we miss saying that you don't want to leave this room without letting them know?
Well, so many good ideas there. I think what I would say is let's make sure that everybody focuses on the collective shared interest that we all have in protecting the country. It really is a shared interest, and whether that's manifested in corporate citizenship, good corporate citizenship in the private sector, whether it's manifested in terms of just everyday Americans, in terms of things like civics and understanding what our country is based on, and kind of doubling down on the values that make us great, I think is part of what happens in organizations and gatherings like this. And it's never been more important than it is right now.
I know I speak on behalf of the room. Thanks for your service. Awesome.
Thank you.
You're wonderful. So much fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could have gone on.
Thank you.
Director Wray, Sue, what an honor to have you all both here today. I think everyone in the room will agree with me. I wanted to thank our sponsors once again, BAE Systems, ClearanceJobs.com, EY, Leidos, Raytheon Technologies, Sims Software, and Strongbox Cyber Solutions. I would like to encourage you all to take the flowers on the table home with you today and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thanks so much.